Howdy folks, welcome back to Sunfun Farms. Today we're going to discuss the expansion of our homestead from the 7.5 acres we live on to a 25-acre piece that we found out in the country. This video will explain some of the pros and cons about the piece of property that we've found. Now the piece of property that we're looking at is 2,600 feet long, which is just about a half mile long, but it's only 500 feet wide. Honestly, I'd really like it to be a little bit wider, but we can deal with it. The piece of property used to have a homestead on it, so it has an existing driveway, the power lines are already run, and it also has a water system that's been fed from the street all the way up to the homestead site. Having the utilities run will probably save us about a month of construction time and also about $10,000 in cost. The front 6 acres are already in pasture, so we'll be able to raise cattle there. Then the middle 7 acres is where we'll have the homestead and all of the small animals. And the back 12 acres are actually heavy woods, so we'll actually be able to do some hunting there. There's also a seasonal creek that runs along the west side of the property, so we know we'll end up getting plenty of deer that follow that creek. There's about a 50-foot drop along the length of the property, so it's a nice gentle slope, which means that we won't have any drainage issues, and we'll be able to use that slope to our advantage in filling up our stock ponds. The southward facing slope also protects us from the harsh north winds and gives us an unobstructed view of the sun for when we install the solar panel. Speaking of alternative energy, the open pasture land at the front of the property will give us a great place to put a couple of wind turbines. We've broken the project up into about 5 phases, each lasting approximately a year. The first phase is land acquisition. Phase 2 will consist of building the house and putting in the 2 primary stock ponds and the geese and the duck pond. During this phase, we plan to purchase a tiny home, put it on the property temporarily, and then when the house is finished being built, we'll move that tiny house to the front of the property and rent it out as an additional income stream. Phase 3 consists of putting in the garden and building the outbuildings for the chickens, rabbits, and quail. In phase 4, we'll build the fishing pond as well as putting in the goat and cattle barn and adding in fencing for those animals. And finally, in phase 5, we'll build the workshop and a couple of eco cabins that we intend to rent out to allow people to come and visit the farm. That'll act as an additional revenue stream. Let's look at each of these phases in a little bit more detail. We'll skip phase 1, land acquisition, since it just sort of happens behind the scenes. The primary goal of phase 2 is to get the house built. As I told you before, we plan to live in a tiny house while I'm building the primary house, and since I plan to do most of the work myself, that means progress may be a little bit slower than normal, but it means it'll also be a lot less expensive, so we'll have less debt when we're done. The secondary goal of phase 2 is to build the 2 stock ponds on the right-hand side of the image, and also to build in the geese and duck pond on the left. Many of the goals that are actually in phase 3 will be worked on concurrently in phase 2 since we already own many of the animals that are included in phase 3. We already have rabbits and chickens, so both of those coops will need to be built almost immediately. We'll also begin working on the garden the very first year, as it takes a while to prepare the bed soil properly. The pig area will be a later goal in phase 3 because we don't intend to have pigs until probably late in our second year. Our bees will move with us and are easy to set up, so they'll be one of the first things we do. We'll also start planting orchards along with blackberries and raspberries and grapes and blueberries. All of these plants take several years to develop a good harvest, so we'll want to get those in as quickly as possible. Phase 4 will be one of the biggest and most expensive phases of the project, so we probably won't start it until year 3. We intentionally waited to put in the fishing pond until phase 4 because we want to ensure that we have enough watershed to support 4 ponds. This will give us the opportunity to watch the first 3 ponds over the course of 2 years to see how big we can plan our fishing pond. One of the most important steps in planning a homestead is access to all the features of your property. As you can see, these paths allow easy access to all areas of the property. The loop on the right-hand side will be around the goat and cattle barn, and I'll be able to drive a truck and trailer easily around that loop to load and unload animals. The goats and cattle will require a larger size building, so we'll build the goat and cattle barn. In addition, we'll add fencing for the goat paddocks, as well as cross-fencing the pasture land for cattle paddocks. The goats and cattle will be watered by a solar-powered DC pump that continuously circulates water from the stock pond into stock tanks and then drains the excess back into the stock pond. This will ensure that the larger animals always have a clean supply of fresh running water. It's important to note that we never let the animals have direct access to the pond. Otherwise, they might foul it up or erode the edges by constantly walking into the pond. Well, folks, that's all for this video. I hope you've enjoyed it, and be sure to join us for our next Operation Homestead video on zone planning.